What do we want to talk about? I think we had so many little calls already where we said we wished we would have recorded it.
Yeah.
Maybe let's talk about again just one more time about that interesting podcast because I think it was so cool.
Yeah. Which one?
Forgot the name of the guy, but the Aussie
Craig Tyndale is his
Craig
name, right?
Tyndale.
Yeah. So I've been following him for a while now on Twitter, and he's always been, coming up with one or two nice tweets here and there. But then I think about 2, 3 weeks ago, he came up with a proper long essay, right? Like, took me about 10 minutes to read through the whole thing on X, and it went really viral. And even the Financial Times in the US referenced that essay, that article.
Whoa.
And so when that podcast came out, I think last week, I was really excited to listen to it. And I've been sending it to all my friends, right? Anyone who I think is slightly interested in it, or is in industry, or does international related sales, whatever, right? Or somehow related to politics. I've been sending it to them and really asking them to please give it a listen. So I think you have given it a listen, right, Flo?
Yeah. Yeah, I did yesterday.
What did you think about it? Was it worth your time?
Yeah, it was cool to hear that he has 7 kids. Yeah, I think it was very interesting. I think not everything was really new, but I think what I liked is the way he tells the story and walks through this whole topic. You know, he has a lot of these examples of where the West has been outsourcing its manufacturing, but not only the manufacturing, also the refinery of minerals and metals and rare earths and to China or other countries, and therefore has lost the ability to do this on their own. It's kind of, I heard the same story with Germany where they were talking about BASF, the biggest chemical company in the world. I'm not sure if it still is, but it was at some point in the last couple of years. Essentially, the energy costs in Germany went up, so they moved parts of their production outside of Germany. And back then, people were talking about, oh yeah, that's not good, but it has far more like deeper reaching implications than one would first think, right? It's if you move a like production of this outside of the country, then you essentially also not only use the company, the tax money and stuff like that, but you also lose the knowledge, right? The university people don't go there to study anymore because it's not there anymore. So they, you lose the ability to know how something is done. And I think that's happened in the West. And I think Craig Tyndale, like, just that's been his core theme that he's been talking about. And I found that quite interesting.
Yeah. I mean, to just give it a bit more color, right? Like, if you put yourself in the shoes of, say, an average engineer, like, say, look at the solar industry, because I've been working in the solar industry quite a bit over the last 10 years. And I think 15, 20 years ago, Germany was the powerhouse in solar manufacturing, right? They had a company called Q Cells, and I think another big company called Solar World. And basically, it was the hub of solar cell manufacturing, especially for top quality solar cells and solar modules. Then China started to come up and started to produce at scale, and they were doing it so much cheaper and, let's say, just in terms of scale, so much bigger that the Western companies couldn't compete anymore. So all these companies got bought up or closed down, the Western ones, right? So just put yourself in the shoes of, say, an engineer that had gone to university, studied what he needed to study, got a job at Q Cells, was working till, probably middle of his career. And then the phase shift happened. And then these guys were faced with a choice, right? Either move to China or Singapore or Taiwan or Korea to continue in the industry, or stay in Germany and, I don't know, find a different job in a different industry, right? See if your skills can be applied elsewhere. So obviously not everybody can just up and go with kids and a wife and, or a husband. And, you can't just say, okay, I'm going to go to the other side of the world now to continue my career. So they're now in a different industry. And even if And that wasn't so long ago, right? Like Q cells is still around. If Q cells wanted to ramp up again, even let's say in a make believe world, Germany said, okay, building solar panels is our number one priority now. Even if they had all the money to throw at it, they don't have the people anymore. Like
Well, yeah,
those,
they'd essentially have to start from scratch, right? They'd have to train these people again and maybe do what China did back then, right? Like they probably sent people to Germany or bought up German equipment and reverse engineered it and find out how they did it and then tried to reproduce it. You know, maybe send some people to German universities to learn about this stuff,
yeah,
and that's
exactly.
how they kickstarted it, right? But it
Exactly.
took years to do so.
And
And
the sad thing is, or the to make matters worse, the solar industry's moved on. And China's now gonna be so much harder to compete with than back then when China had to compete with Germany, right? Because it was still a budding industry at the time.
yeah,
But now that it's mature, it's gonna be so much harder to displace or compete again with China. And then when you listen to that podcast and you realize that this is basically the same story throughout all different industries, right?
yeah, yeah. Okay, but then like the interesting question that I have then is like how like why did that happen, right? The Chinese are like just as smart as the Germans are, I guess, or as the Americans. You know, they don't have an advantage in that sense, but how did they manage to do that?
Yeah, I think it's not only them doing it, but it was more the Western world deciding that the profits of these, they don't call it profits, they call it like a value add, right? So when you
Hmm.
have, when say you look at a solar module, right, you've got aluminum in there, all the different rare earths, you've got silver, you've got silicon. Silicon, you know, in its raw form is like silica, which you find in sand, right? So you need to find a way to purify that sand to like a very high purity of silica before you then turn it into these wafers, right? And
Hmm.
all these steps, they're super energy intensive, they're super dirty, right? In terms of pollution, it's really heavy industry, and the profits in those steps are not that high,
Yeah.
right? All the money's made at the end of the line, right? And I think
Mm.
the Western world just slowly decided step by step, hey, we won't do the easy bit. Let's do the next bit. Let's do the next bit, right? Let's just do the value added, like the fattest value add parts, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
so China gobbled up, or not only China, any developing country you want to name, right? Maybe it's Vietnam, maybe it's Indonesia. They took on all the, let's say, the dirty, less profitable sections of the manufacturing process, right? And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
so it's not really that China was so competitive in these aspects. It was also a strategic decision from these Western companies to say, hey, we don't need to keep all this in house, or even we don't need to keep all this within our geographical boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe the whole climate change agenda came on top of that. And probably also when they did that, labor was a lot cheaper over in China. And these processes probably were labor intensive back then. Maybe they're not that much anymore because you can automate a lot nowadays, but that's probably how it was, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not an expert in this field, right? But I'm pretty sure there was some of these like creative accounting going on where, you know, a company could say that, hey, I meet all my sustainability targets because I don't produce so much carbon. You know, I'm buying these wafers from China, and the carbon is taken on by that carbon production was produced by some other Chinese company. So that's not on my books. So I can tell everyone that I'm like a super green company because I don't produce that much carbon, but I produce solar panels at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Well, that was definitely a thing that went on for a long time and still
Yeah.
is, right? I think like everybody's sort of still greenwashing this whole thing, right? They only see a small part of the puzzle,
Yeah.
whereas the climate is a global one
Exactly. It's so funny.
and
Like
air pollution is, yeah.
Apple can say that they've got a low carbon footprint because their supplier Foxconn was the one that was producing all the carbon. Let's say,
Yeah.
right? I'm assuming. I don't know. Don't quote me on that, but you get the gist of it, right?
Yeah. 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 So that was quite an interesting article. What I'm still trying to figure out is what to make of that in the next couple of years. Um, right? Like what are because I like to be like to prepare for that stuff. I like to be like take something maybe that's actionable out of this, and I'm still trying to figure out what I can do. Right? Will that be a surge in investment in the Western world into this kind of stuff to get back to refining minerals? Like will Australia now invest back into steel plants and make its own steel out of the iron ore? Or um, yeah, what's going to happen?
Yeah, I don't know how that it like almost needs to there almost needs to be this whole systems philosophical change, right, on a systems level, that people see that supply chains are sexy again, right? Not just the final product, not just the IPOs, not just the profits and the share price quarterly returns, right? It has to be more like, hey, look at us. We're building XYZ product and we own the whole supply chain, you know.
Yeah.
We're able to say that we can control cradle to grave of this whole thing. And I don't know how long that's going to take. It's pretty
Yeah, and,
funny.
and it's almost like, will it be able to jumpstart itself, right? Because I think it needs huge government incentives to do this at the moment. Because from a pure capitalistic perspective, it's just going to be much cheaper to still ship iron ore, if we stick with this example, to China
Yeah, yeah.
and then buy
Or
the finished steel.
Or, if I was to be a bit controversial, another way that this thing could shift like drastically, radically, and almost instantly is that, you know, there's a huge re-rate of like FX currency valuations, right? Like imagine if the Chinese yuan was currently, you know, it's currently 7 or 8 to 1 to the US dollar. Imagine if it suddenly went to 2 to 1, or God forbid, 1 to 1, right? Then suddenly doing these things in China becomes so much less profitable, right? To use the capitalistic lens. And so then that would drive investments, you know, it would reverse all those investment flows, right? The foreign investments would probably go to where you can manufacture but do so at scale at a cheaper price. If, just relatively speaking, if the US dollar were to go to 1, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but just for the sake of argument, right? If it was to go to 1 to the Chinese yuan, then it would be like overnight, at least from the financial standpoint, you know, it's 8 times cheaper, relatively speaking, than it was the day before.
Yeah. To manufacture in the US compared
Yeah.
to manufacturing in China. But I mean, like that's something, that's not an easy thing to just do because China will have a say in that. The US will try to have a say in this. And at the end of the day, it's some sort of market. The FX currencies is also a market. So they can, each party can try and play with supply and demand, but the other party can do that too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's not like this Craig Tyndale says, it's not easy, right? And I think anyone who has been involved with these things and has seen the how the gears of the machine work, they would also come to the conclusion that, hey, it's not easy. Like China basically mobilized a very hardworking, homogenous population, right? That was working at
Hmm.
very, very cheap rates, and they took like 3 decades, you know, with
Yeah.
1.4 billion people speaking the same language, to build out this machine. And so how can, even if the West were to do it, you would assume, okay, then it'll take at least that amount of time or more.
But isn't that also going to change? Because like China's, from what I've heard, is becoming far more wealthy now, and so these kind of jobs, they'd probably now is that I'm not sure if that's happening, but these kind of things that have been brought to China, wouldn't they now try to outsource them somewhere poorer than China?
Yeah, so I've said this on other podcasts before, right? Like there was once where I had this really illuminating conversation with some Chinese industrialists that were moving their supply chains to Vietnam.
Hmm.
And they were saying that even though the land is cheaper, even though the wages are a third of what we have to pay Chinese workers, it's still more expensive to do it in Vietnam because Vietnam doesn't enjoy the access to supply chains like we enjoy in China. And
Mm.
then when I asked him to elaborate a little bit, he was like, okay, so imagine if I need this spare part for a production line, right? Something goes down and I need this spare part. In China, it takes me 6 hours to get it. In Vietnam, it
Hmm.
takes me 3 days. So that 3 day period, I'm losing money while my
But why is
factory is
that?
down.
Are they just a bunch of lazy
No, no, it's not.
people in Vietnam?
It's not. It's not. It's not like that. It's more like the actual logistics supply chains, right? So
Hmm.
when you manufacture something in China, your suppliers say, okay, all the parts, part of the contract is that all the parts you need, we will have like how many days or months on stock, and we will keep it at your factory. It's consigned to us, but whenever you need it, it's basically there on your factory floor. And then whenever you need it, you pay us and pay us 30 days after you use it or something like that. But once
Yeah.
that good has to cross international borders, this whole frictionless sort of interaction, you can imagine there's a lot more friction there, right? The banking system's different. The rules for at customs is different. Nobody wants to have that much stock on hand. Who's going to pay for it? Because the number of factories in Vietnam is so much less than in China. So why would the supplier want to risk putting so much spare parts in a smaller market? Just stuff like that, right?
Yeah, of course. But like I think that is something that Europe and China had figured out 20 years ago quite well, right? Where for the last 10 years or so, that's exactly what they did, right? Well, let's say Bosch buys stuff from China to then put into their finished products.
Yep. Yeah, yeah.
So,
So I guess it's possible, but it's not going to be easy unless you have this very high level of prioritization. And then even then, it will take time.
yeah. But then, then a part of me is thinking like, okay, why is that even all a problem? Like, why not just let China manufacture that stuff? If, let's say, New Zealand, for example, I think we talked about this yesterday. If New Zealand, for example, produces a lot of dairy, produces a lot of like high quality meat because it's all pastures and grass and a good climate for that here. If they just produce that, China wants that, then we have trade, right? And both countries can sort of benefit from that trade. China can buy the good dairy products and the good meat, and New Zealand can buy farming equipment from China, and both can be happy. And
Yeah,
maybe New Zealand doesn't want to produce doesn't want to manufacture their own tractors.
yeah. I think for most of the countries, right, most countries on this planet, that's a deal that they're going to be pretty happy with. I think
Yeah.
right now the friction is more between countries like the US and Europe versus countries like China because New Zealand doesn't have an arms industry, right?
Yeah.
So if New Zealand says, hey, I want to import, I don't know, 50,000 drones to help me with my agricultural stuff,
Hmm.
China doesn't have that threat to go, would these drones one day be, or the materials within these drones, will they be repurposed to be used against us?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. But China, I mean, you can't blame China for feeling threatened because just do a Google search on how many times a Western ship has sailed down the Taiwan Strait to say, oh, we're ensuring freedom of navigation or whatnot, right? Like I
Yeah.
don't
Or how
think
many military bases are close to China, whereas how many Chinese military bases are close to the US?
exactly. Put it another way, how many New Zealand military bases are there, in the South China Sea, right? There's not that
Yeah.
many. So China doesn't feel the need to defend against them. But it's a whole different story when someone like the US is saying, hey, ship me these materials so I can make missiles.
Yeah. Yeah. So the whole problem is essentially then, a problem between the US and China because the US has realized, oh, we can't manufacture the weapons anymore without tapping into massive Chinese supply chains. And therefore, we're sort of in this weird state, right? If we wanted to threaten or like go to war with China, we don't have a lot of missiles and a lot of tanks and a lot of F whatever jets because all that stuff we cannot produce anymore. It comes from China. But so that's a US problem. But New Zealand, Australia, other countries that just might be on good terms with China and be happy to just, trade and do all of that, they wouldn't have the same sort of problem.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So I think it all stems from this worldview that every actor in this system has. Do they believe that China wants to be hegemonic and use these supply chains and weaponize these supply chains or not?
Mm. Yeah.
Right. I think that's the main question.
Yeah.
And anyone who believes that the Chinese will weaponize these supply chains against them,
Hmm.
they will then naturally, try and mitigate that by saying, hey, we need to bring these supply chains home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Mm.
I think most, yeah. And in the past, the West was able to apply leverage themselves by using not supply chains but financial systems, right, to keep control over other nations, right? It was almost like yeah, I don't know what you see the number of sanctions that have been put forth globally over the years, right? So it doesn't have to be a kinetic war type of a threat. It can just simply be, hey, we're gonna kick you out of the SWIFT system, or we're gonna not allow you to get financing for certain types of projects.
Yeah. Yeah.
And honestly, it's a pretty elegant system, right? China now says, hey, we don't want to sell you rare earths because you're going to build weapons. In the past, America or Europe could just say, hey, we're not going to allow this certain company to get credit to build their product because we think it's a threat. And then that was
Hmm.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. But China kind of, they could lend to that company themselves, right? They could produce that money themselves, especially since they've run such a trade surplus.
Yeah, now they can. They couldn't do
Yeah.
it 30 years ago, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But now they can. And I think
Yeah.
that's why it is now getting scary because, it's getting scary from the Western perspective because they realize that leverage that they used to be able to apply, it's losing its effectiveness.
Yeah. That weapon doesn't work anymore,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah. And I think that's why you see Trump talking about how, oh, if the BRICS ever tries to get around the dollar, I'm going to put 100% tariffs on you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you see it with Greenland now. It's like, oh, if you
Hmm.
don't give us Greenland, you're gonna get 10% tariffs, and if not by April, 25%,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that's a form of that is a threat, right? It's a blatant threat.
Yeah. So interesting, right? Because the US certainly is a very large economy, but compared to the rest of the world, it's not that large. It's certainly the wealthiest, so there's a lot of money in these 300 something million people that buy stuff from elsewhere. But at some point, even these threats won't be that important anymore because a lot of countries have lived for quite a long time under these sanctions, right? Like Iran and a bunch of others that have been sanctioned to a quite high degree.
Yeah. And another aspect, I think that, like the next penny to drop, if you think about that story of the emperor that had no clothes, right? So everyone says America is very wealthy. But when you ask what is their wealth denominated in,
Yeah.
right, it's denominated in dollars. And what's the use of dollars besides what a dollar can buy?
Yeah.
Right. And I think people are slowly coming to the realization that I want to use my dollars to buy things. And if the supply chains to make these things are now no longer, except the dollar's no longer money good for these things, then
Hmm.
what is a dollar worth? And if that question gets called into being enough, people start to look around and say, hey, are we really that wealthy or not? Right?
Yeah.
Because they're not wealthy in terms of gold. They're not wealthy in terms of how many artillery shells they can build. They're not wealthy in terms of the number of mobile phones they can build or cars they can build,
Yeah.
relatively speaking to the rest of the world. They are wealthy in things like software, right? And
Yeah. Software companies. Well,
financial
if you look at the
assets, right?
NASDAQ or the SPY, right, the top 10 companies are all massive, massive software companies and their business model is essentially um, advertising
Yeah. You know,
or derivatives of that.
Yeah, I don't know if it's true or not, but they said that the biggest driver of GDP, not GDP growth, but just like in terms of how much of an economy is being used, that economic energy is being directed, to which industry. And I think
Hmm.
in the US, it's the medical industry. And it's not
Mm.
doctors or nurses, but it's medical administration. So things to do with insurance, things to do with claims, things to do with litigation, stuff like that, right?
So that's where the most money flows into.
That's where the most economic activity is at. And
Mm.
if you were to look at a country and go, okay, which industry is the biggest? So say 5 years ago in Germany, you would say, the automotive industry is the biggest, right? Because everything to do with automotive manufacturing
Yeah.
is considered part of that industry, right? So
Yeah.
whether you're importing chips or rubber or wiring or whatever, if it's to do with cars, then it sits under that industry. And apparently, I don't know, I find it hard to believe, but that's the biggest one in the US. So, for example, that or banking or software, they don't actually make things. They're the secondary products that you use to make sure that you're able to make things.
Yeah. And I mean, they might help you make things more efficient,
Exactly.
but
But
they're still a derivative. Yeah.
yeah. So
Well, but then, I mean, like a tractor would also be that, right? You can
yeah,
still
but
plow the field by hand or with an ox,
yeah,
and
yeah,
the
yeah.
tractor helps you do it faster. But
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so I don't know, man. I don't know. I feel like there's gonna be this great awakening almost, right? Because for most of human history, everyone, I don't know, everyone looked at wealth as how much real stuff do I have, right? How many houses do I have? How many acres of farmland do I have? How many aeroplanes do I have, right?
Hmm.
But nowadays, it's like how many stocks of Amazon do I have, or Apple, or Bitcoin, or it's just
Yeah.
it's not as real as it once was. And so, what happens if there is that phase shift where people just go
Hmm.
back to how it always was, that mean reversion?
Yeah. 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 I mean, that's an interesting one, right? Because like I said, the Nasdaq and these top 10 companies. I heard something where Nvidia alone, the market valuation was bigger than the entire European stock market, right? That's I don't know what to make of that, right? Chips are certainly, or chip design is certainly important, but the whole of the European, all of these companies, right? It's more valuable than that, than building, manufacturing cars, all that supply chain knowledge that goes into all of this. Like Airbus, is it really bigger than all of that?
Yeah, combined, right, in one
Yeah,
company.
yeah.
The a guy that I had on my podcast, Trader Ferg,
Mm.
he I met him in Bali, and then we were talking about Tesla's valuation versus BYD or something, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
like at that time, he was showing me, and it was crazy. It was like Tesla was worth more than all the other car companies combined or something,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah. I saw that. Yeah.
It's not the case anymore today, but it wasn't that long ago. It was like 2 3 years ago, maybe. And a huge part of it was Tesla saying that we're going to be able to allow for autonomous driving, right?
Yeah.
And we're going to have these robo taxis, and every car will be, generating revenue for the owner while the owner's at work or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And so those things were then just, multiplied and multiplied, and then, all that value went into the stock. And then Lovis and I visited China, and we sat in a Huawei car, and it was
Yeah.
already autonomous.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
and 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 they were saying that the software was free, and it didn't matter which model you bought. You could have, bought the S class 7 series equivalent, or you could have
Hmm.
bought the Toyota Corolla Volkswagen Polo equivalent, and they all
Yeah.
had the software for free. So then, if
Yeah.
that's the case, then what is that software worth, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like you could argue, and I think that was part of the argument that it was the data that they were recording so much of that video data because the Teslas, I think they operate on cameras and they were training large models with that data on in terms of like how to behave and how to react on the roads. And we're training that with people and then applying that to automate the cars to, just like a machine learning or an LLM these days works. it's trained on a large amount of data. I think that was their argument, right? But yeah, I'm not sure what the moat is here, right? Because everybody can do that
Yeah,
and
and
start collecting that data. It's just about like how many vehicles do you have out there, and China's a massive market. So I bet Huawei or like BYD actually overtook Tesla now in vehicle sales, right? So and now that will then work against Tesla because they will be capturing far more data now if they just put cameras into their vehicles.
yeah, and what if Huawei or BYD was to come up with something to say, hey, we'll offer our learning, our
Mm-hmm.
models as a third party thing for, I don't know, General Motors. If you want it, you can have it. This is how much it's going to cost you per vehicle, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Or
yeah.
anyone who's trying to come up with a new model, you can use everything we've learned in China and then start training your models from that baseline data set. Whatever it is, it's a competition that will compress margins. So then again, it comes back to, hey, how rich is the West really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's probably rich in having a lot of the natural resources that you need to survive.
For
The US
sure.
definitely has,
Yeah.
a ton of
Yeah.
oil, a ton of gas, very large country to produce almost everything. It spans across, a lot of different climate zones, and
Yep.
it's certainly very rich in that
Yep.
sense. But
Yeah.
yeah, if you can't turn the oil into something, or need to import other stuff, and all of that is not a problem, unless you get into a fight. If it's all happy and peace, then cool. You sell some oil to China, and China sells you some car technology, and you can just live along like that without problems.
Yeah. So I don't know if you saw last week, there was this reporter uh, that asked Trump, or was it 2 weeks ago now? I don't know. Time's passing so quickly. The reporter asked Trump after the whole Venezuela episode. He asked Trump, "Oh, does that mean that now China's got the green light to do what they want with Taiwan?"
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Right? Trump just said,
And he said,
"Well,
"I don't
then,
care what China does," right?
yeah, you got to ask Xi Jinping that."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
Which is like a
so
completely different stance to what it was a year ago or two.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
And so
they were
when you
still trying to
said,
police China.
yeah, and now it's interesting because you just said, oh, if everybody would just get along, it'd be fine, right? So
Yeah,
maybe that's Trump
that's the American
coming to
stance
the
from now.
coming to that realization. Hey, we need these things at the moment that only China can produce, so we don't have a leg to stand on, right?
Yeah, yeah. So they need to play nice until they have their supply chains under control, and then they can be the bully again if they manage to come back out of this situation.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's I told you this, but I think that got me a little bit concerned. That whole Trump doing the Venezuela, seizing assets from them, which led me to rethink if it is such a good idea to have all investments or a lot of investments in the U.S. And yeah, I think it's definitely worth considering for people to maybe move some of their stuff into the countries that they are citizens in or
yeah,
live in.
yeah. I mean, the financial markets in America dwarfs all others, right? The rest of the world combined, I think it's not even half of what the market capitalization is of American financial instruments, right? If you add everything together.
Yeah, yeah,
So if even at the margins people start having similar sentiments to you, and I'm sure they are, then it's going to be a huge whoosh, right? And the opportunity, I think, is where's that money going to go into? Because everything else is so small. Even a
yeah.
little bit of money flowing back into their own markets, right? If people pull money out of the US and just like look at Japan, right? If they just say, hey,
Hmm.
look, our bonds are going higher, let's just sell some portion of what we have in the US and bring it home, it will
Yeah,
cause Japanese assets to go berserk, right? Because
yeah,
there's
yeah,
so
yeah.
much, it's so lopsided at the moment.
Yeah. I think like there might be something with China. I haven't looked into the details of how Chinese companies are valued at the moment, but I think there's this sentiment shift where more like this is what I'm seeing on Twitter, right? Like if you asked like okay, let's take Levels.io, Peter Levels, right? He's this indie hacker builder guy making a ton of money with AI apps. and has built up quite a large Twitter following. I've been following him for a while, and I think, if you asked him like 2 years ago, he would say like invest everything in the Nasdaq or in like an SPY, American Stock Index. But I think like he is slowly starting to pivot on this, right? I've seen in the recent tweets he's been talking about gold. He's visited China. He's buying real estate and like changing his opinion on that. So you already see it with gold, but I think more and more people will also come to this conclusion that China is, the BYDs are quite good and they can keep up with the Teslas, and that will maybe then have people rethink their approach in terms
Yep.
of I can buy this stuff from China. They're quite advanced with their technology. Like, why not then buy the Chinese tech index and put some money into that?
Yep.
And I think
Uh,
that might be something that will have a sentiment shift, right? We're seeing it already, maybe, but more and more people will wake up to that.
and again, right, it is this thing, right, this awakening, because I think once you see it, you cannot unsee it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, China, like, to people that haven't been to China, a lot of Westerners, when you talk to them, the way they describe it, it sounds like they think China's this really massive North Korea.
Yeah,
Everyone's on bicycles, everyone's dressing the same, and they've got all these massive square block looking factories, and they just churn out everything the world needs cheaply, right?
yeah,
But
yeah.
then I think anyone who's gone there, had a look, understood it just beyond surface level. They go like, OMG, my iPhone that I've been using, my MacBook that I love so much, my Nikon cameras, all these
Mm-hmm.
things that I feel is the pinnacle of hardware design and manufacturing. It's actually made here,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
And
So
then
then,
yeah, but I think like these are things. I mean, this is a cool example, but I think it can go much further than that, right? Because Apple puts on their items says like designed in California, right? So
yeah,
you could think like, okay, everybody can build something. I'll specify, but I think what the Chinese have achieved is that they've gone to a level where they produce really cool stuff that is also designed in China.
yep,
Right, so
yep,
take DJI is my favorite example because they're absolutely dominating the recreational, if that's the right word, drone market. There's no better drones out there. I've had one of these 5 years ago, and they're already so good. I can only imagine how good the current versions are.
yeah. And you can't say they copied someone to build those things, right?
No, because there is nothing else that they could have copied it from. So like I think like the whole innovation that happened there came from them. And then you look at the current BYD cars. Like I see it in Australia and New Zealand. I've been living in Australia and New Zealand for 6 years now, or roughly 6 years. And like when I came here, there weren't that many Chinese cars. There was like maybe like a GWM here and there, but now there's so many BYD cars that are popping up. More and more people are buying them. And yeah, they must be good if people are buying them.
They're good enough, put it that way, right? They're
They are
good
good enough.
enough.
Yeah.
If not, no
Yeah.
one would be buying them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And dude,
And
you're
yeah,
really into
coffee
coffee, right?
gear.
Yeah. Tell
Yeah.
tell tell everyone about coffee, because I just to set the scene, right? When I first went to China for work in 2015, outside of Shanghai, right? There's no that you couldn't get a coffee. Like, you go 1 hour out of Shanghai and there was no coffee to be had. Like, we
Hmm.
were in a city of, I think, like 15 million people in 2015, and we were dying for a coffee, right? Because all of us were so addicted to coffee. And so our distributor said, all right, I'll take you to I will go across town and go to the Marriott before we go for our meeting, because they might have a coffee there, you
Jeez.
know. And it was eight US dollars for something that supposedly was coffee, but definitely didn't taste like coffee, right?
Yeah. A
And then,
caffeinated beverage.
yeah, like, it was just sitting on some hot stove for, I don't know, the last 6 days, right? It was just like charcoal with water, but
Mm.
that was their version of coffee. And just that was what, 10, 11 years ago.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now I can't go anywhere in China without getting a coffee that is as good as what you'd get in Melbourne, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's true. And then because of that, I think a lot of the coffee gear is now coming from China. And in the same way, I think it started off being manufactured in China, designed elsewhere. But now I think there's lots and lots of these things that are now designed and manufactured in China. And that means the guys have caught up with the rest and are now able to innovate. And I'd argue that they're now going to be able to innovate much faster because now the designer can talk to the manufacturer. They speak the same language. They sit in the same city. It's not like before you had some Aussie having to fly over to China, send him some specs on how to build something. And then the Chinese had no clue about coffee, then build that thing. It was like, it seems like a slow and tedious process. But if you have a Chinese coffee enthusiast sitting next to a manufacturing guy and explaining to him, like, here's what I want, help me do this, right? You'll get much faster iterations.
And you've got such a massive, massive market. So the moment you crack it,
Yeah,
you've got your incentives are off the charts, right?
yeah.
And like you said, the feedback loop, what you mentioned was illustrating the feedback loop between the final product seller and the supplier, right? But don't forget the feedback loop between the customer, the market, right, and
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
the hardware manufacturer. So if you've got a billion people telling you, "Oh, I love my coffee with a little bit more creamer,"
Mm-hmm.
you're able to get that feedback like instantaneously, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Some really cool stuff. Like I bought this hand grinder, and I don't have this confirmed, but supposedly it's the same factory sort of, but a no-name or a Chinese internal brand, and it's much cheaper. And it's maybe the build quality is not exactly the same, but it's very, very close to that outside-facing, very famous brand. I
And
think
that
they're doing
brand is
well.
a Western one. Is that outside facing brand a Western one?
Well, not exactly. It's a Taiwanese. So, but I would call a Taiwanese brand like almost a Western one
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
because if you I mean if you go around and you go through the most popular coffee YouTube channel, they all are talking about the Easy Presso ZP6. That's that coffee grinder. It's really good for these tea like light roast body coffees because it has that the particle size distribution is very even, so you can extract all these different flavors and you'll taste them. Right? If you have a grinder that can't do that, you will brew your coffee and it will taste like some coffee, right? But what the industry is moving towards is sort of these light roast coffees, or that on the bags they put it tastes like dark cherry and green apple and stuff like that. And if you really want that, then you need a very good grinder to make sure that you can actually also pull out these flavors when you pour the coffee. So you grind finer so you can get the extraction right without diluting the extraction with any particles that you don't want in there that bring in maybe bitterness or sourness. And for that, you need quite a good grinder, right? And that company has achieved that, and everybody recognizes that. And yeah, the Kin grinder I think is the Chinese brand, and yeah, they've produced one that's half the price and seems to work pretty much the same.
Yeah, it's crazy. I see. Yeah, I see the same with lenses. Like I shoot I
Mm.
love these vintage rangefinder type camera systems. And recently, this Chinese company basically came out and said, "Hey, all these old Leica lenses that Leica themselves don't make anymore, we're going to make like modern iterations of them. So we'll use the same optical formula, but we'll use
Mm.
modern glass. We'll make it out of brass as well, and instead of paying 35,000 euros for a collector's item, right, you can get
Yeah,
it for like 800.
yeah.
So you get a brand new 1965 version, like a 50 mm 1.4 aperture, whatever, right? And
Hmm.
everyone on the internet's raving about it because they go like, "Oh, I find it like I've been a photographer my whole life and I thought I'd never even be able to hold such a lens, and here I am getting to shoot with it, and it's brand
Yeah,
new and it comes with a warranty."
yeah, yeah, yeah. But that's what I mean with this. I think like China is in a pretty cool sweet spot of that innovation that maybe Germany was in 30 years ago or so, where they had the people that designed the product plus the manufacturing all in one place that would speak the same language. They were able to specify and innovate and iterate on it super quickly. And then
Yeah.
plus this time China has a massive market.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that everyone still can't really understand, because I think you could agree with it on a surface level, right? On a rational level. But to actually understand that, hey, this country is not only an export powerhouse, which Germany is, Japan is, Korea is, America was.
Hmm.
At the same time, they've got a big enough market that if they so choose, they could actually just look inwards. Right? Like
Hmm.
Germany could never do that. Germany could never say, all right, BMW, Volkswagen, like let's just look towards our internal market and focus there for a few years, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Maybe with one of the auto companies, but not with 10.
Yeah, yeah. Like the market's just not big enough. You always need to make sure you're on good terms with all your trading partners, etc., etc. And you do so much statecraft. You make sure
Yeah,
that the products can be shipped out across international lines to get to where they need to go. There
yeah,
needs to
yeah.
be all these trade agreements and blah blah blah, right? China just goes like, yeah, we've got 1.4 billion and if you guys don't want it, we'll lend money to Africa and develop Africa and Central Asia, and then maybe they'll want some of our stuff as well. Just
Yeah.
like how America did, right, with so many other countries to like bring them out of the developing world status so that they could then become consumers for their own products. China's doing that as well. Plus, they've got more than a billion people of their own.
Of their own market. So how do you? Okay, let's say we're seeing this. We might be early to seeing this. How would one position themselves into benefiting from maybe that shift? Right. So we're seeing it. Maybe we might be early. You might be especially early because you go to China a lot. You speak the language. How might someone go and it's like, okay, if China is that good and they're only going to get better and the rest of the world's going to realize that in the next couple of years, how can I benefit from it?
I think if I was to look at things from an individual's perspective, I would say everybody needs to just, if you're somewhat China interested, go there and have a look for yourself, right? Gain an understanding of the country, of the civilization that is your own, right? Like make your own, come up with your own understanding as much as you can, because there's so much spin about China in the news that I read that I just feel it's pretty inaccurate, right? And then after going there and then coming to this sort of whatever your framework of understanding is, see how you can make it relevant for yourself, right? In your own line of work, with your own business, with your own journey. So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule about it. I mean, we could say, hey, you should go and invest in Alibaba or whatever, right? But I don't know. I don't think
Mm.
that's the best way to go about it. I think it'd be akin to, answering a similar parallel question, I don't know, in the 50s, right? Didn't know what the United States was about. They had just lived through, a century of European dominance, British Empire, and before that it was all the other empires. So what does it mean to be American, and what is America, and how do Americans think and feel and behave, and what motivates them? How do
Yeah.
you work with them, etc. Right? You have to go there to see for yourself, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's probably the ideal path to take, right? But so for me, I'm already, I haven't been there, and I'm not sure if I'm gonna make it anytime soon. Even though it's not too far. We'd love to go one day, but these short trips have become quite exhausting for us. We might go and stay a bit longer, just like you do it. I think that'd be a good model. But I think, like in the meantime, I'm just seeing all this, seeing all these signs. By maybe you don't have to go there. Maybe you just buy products. Maybe you just try out some products. Maybe you order something from Taobao, or you observe how many Chinese products you see, and then
Yeah.
you make a move based on that, right? Maybe that's enough to get you to take some money out of your American index fund and put a little bit of that into a Chinese index fund.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I agree with that. I'd say just be aware of how much of what you interact with on a daily basis has actually crossed the Chinese border, right, at some point,
Yeah,
whether it's your
everything.
phone, your computer, parts of your car, right, whatever
Yeah,
it is. And then when it's probably when it's the car you're driving or the bus you're in on the way to school or whatnot, you don't get such a, let's say, intimate interaction with things. But when you're talking about, taking pictures or making coffee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Grinding that coffee, pouring that coffee out into some, I don't know, coffee filter, right? And then you realize, hey, even with the finer things that you actually care a lot about, you realize that, hey, there's a certain quality there,
Mm.
And I think for most of my life anyway, there was always this, joke, almost this gag. Oh yeah, yeah, haha, it's made in China. Everything's made in China, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
it was more like derogatory. It was more means it's cheap and it's
Mm-hmm.
not good. I've come to realize, and for a while now already, for many products, if you want the best possible iteration of a certain product, you have to get it made in China.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's not about cost and it's not about speed. It's actually about quality, right?
yeah,
I mean, I'm talking to you now on an iPhone. It's made in China.
yeah,
The headphones I'm listening to you on, it's made in China.
yeah.
And I
Yeah,
know
and the
when I was
quality's
buying
there.
the, yeah, when I was buying the phone, I wasn't looking for the cheapest one.
Yeah, yeah. You look for a good quality one. Exactly. They've gotten to that level where they can produce that. Yeah, and I've gone to. I didn't mention that with the coffee, but with that coffee grinder, it wasn't possible to order it outside of China. So I had to find a way to order it directly from China. So I had to get the Taobao app, which luckily is in English, and was able to identify the manufacturer and their shop there, and then was able to buy it from there, which
I
was
think
yeah not as easy.
you touch on an important point, right? I think one thing that the Chinese somehow are just never as good as the West in is marketing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if like an individual wanted to get involved somehow, right, with this juggernaut that it just keeps growing every year, is think about how you can, if you see a product that you like and at the moment it's still only listed on Taobao, right?
Yeah,
Find a way, like maybe get them to white label it and then rebadge your own brand on it or whatever, right? Just be that distribution for the Chinese company outside of China.
yeah. I
Because
think
somehow marketing for Chinese brands, they just always fall short.
yeah, I think the problem here is then to have at least a little bit of a moat. I think you'd also have to get involved in the design part
Yep.
because nowadays, information spreads so quickly. People will find out that you're just taking the kin grinder and making the flow grinder. That wouldn't work very well or wouldn't last very long. But if you somehow like added a bit of value as well to it by refining the design, or then maybe that would help. Or curate. Maybe there's a thing to curate. I had to go deep into Reddit posts to find out about this thing and where to get it. That wasn't easy.
Yeah, maybe you need to talk to Levels, see if you can ask him for tips on how you can make like aggregator sites, right? People that are in love with coffee, they go on a Western looking site and it's got access to all the bestest and greatest and latest coffee gear from the Middle Kingdom, something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Can't access it. Yeah, true. Yeah, yeah. Cool, man. I think you're running out of battery again. About time you get
Yeah.
to the warmer climates.
Yeah, this made in China phone, man. 1 hour in the cold and it's dead.
Garbage, man. Made in China. They're never gonna be. Yeah.
All right, then Flo, thanks so much for yet another talk and walk.
Talking the walk. All right. Thanks everyone for listening, and hope to get another one of these in soon.
Yep. Catch
All
you later,
right.
Flo.
Bye.